executive privilege serves the necessity for protection of the public interest in candid, objective, and even harsh opinions in presidential decision-making. Let me just say that again. Executive privilege serves the public interest. It's for us. It's for we the people. It's not for President Trump. It's not for Mark Meadows. It's not for any president. It's not for any chief of staff. It's for the country. But the Democrats, they're not going to worry about that. They're going to forget about that because they think this is good politics. They think this is all about politics. They used to care. They used to care about executive privilege when Republicans wanted information. During the Fast and Furious scandal, President Obama asserted executive privilege for bureaucrats at ATF and DOJ. And think about it. A bureaucrat in a federal agency gets privilege, but not the chief of staff to the president, because Mark Meadows worked for President Trump. And Democrats have been out to get President Trump before he ever took office when they first tried to spy on him, actually did spy on him in 2016. They're going to destroy this precedent even though this very question is in front of the courts as we speak. They're going to destroy this precedent that's been around since 1794 when our first president first asserted it. And for what? What did Mark Meadows do? He gave the committee thousands of emails. He gave the committee thousands of text messages. And he agreed to come in front of the committee and answer any question as long as it didn't violate executive privilege. The privilege that's not his to waive, it belongs to the president. The privilege that the court said is critical to executive decision-making. The privilege that exists for the benefit of we, the people, and the privilege that's been around since George Washington asserted it. But Democrats says, nope, not good enough, Mr. Meadows. You've got to come in and answer any and every question we ask you, or we're going to try to put you in prison. It's disgusting. It is so disgusting. Think about it. We weren't allowed to know who the so-called anonymous whistleblower was when they tried to impeach President Trump, did impeach President Trump, but Democrats can destroy executive privilege. The country wasn't allowed to know what took place in that bunker in the basement of the Capitol during impeachment, but they get to know any and everything they want about conversations between the president and his top advisor. This is so wrong. Democrats on the Select Committee, they also can't make up their minds. With Steve Bannon, they said, you have to appear in person to assert any privilege. And because he didn't come, they held him in contempt. With Jeff Clark, they said, come in person, assert privilege, which he did. And they said, nope, that's not good enough, and they held him in contempt. And now with Mark Meadows, he gave him thousands of documents and agreed to come. And they still said, not good enough. Not good enough. What a charade. Make no mistake. Make no mistake. When Democrats vote in favor of this resolution, it is a vote to put a good man in prison. That is don't pretend to argue either. Don't even attempt the argument. No. This is just a House acting. The Justice Department will make a decision whether to prosecute or not. Come on, is there anyone who believes that? It took the Attorney General all of 5 days to treat parents as terrorists. All of 5 days. If a left-wing political group can write the White House asking the Department of Justice to use the Patriot Act against moms and dads, and 5 days later the Attorney General of the United States does just that, then what do you think he's going to do when 225 Democrats in the House of Representatives ask him to put President Trump's chief of staff in prison? I've been in Congress a while, 15 years. I've seen Democrats weaponize the government to attack their political opponents. 10 years ago, they used the IRS to target good people around this country, good conservative people. 5 years ago, they used the FBI to spy on, abused the FISA process, used the FBI to spy on President Trump's campaign. 2 months ago, it was the Department of Justice using the Counterterrorism Division at the FBI to put a threat tag, a label, a designation on parents who had the gall to go speak up at a school board meetings and defend their kids, speak out against some crazy curriculum. And now they're destroying executive privilege. Now they're attacking that. And this might be the worst. destroying a precedent that has been around since George Washington and treating Mark Meadows as a criminal. Mark Meadows is our former colleague. He is a good man, and he is my friend. And this is as wrong as it gets. And I think deep down, everyone knows it. I think they know it as well. They know this is wrong. We've all served with this guy. He is co-sponsored. He's done more work with Democrats than probably any Republican. We all know what a good man he is, and this is as wrong as it gets. You all know it. But your lust for power, your lust to get your opponents is so intense.
Mr. Speaker, I yield all of our remaining time to the great gentleman from Ohio, the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, Mr. Jordan.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding. Americans want safer streets, affordable gas, and freedom. Instead, Democrats give us record crime levels, record inflation, and another bill attacking President Trump, sponsored by the guy who spent years misleading the Congress and, more importantly, the country on Trump-Russia investigation, on Mueller investigation, on impeachments. Remember when the sponsor of the bill said that his office didn't meet with the whistleblower? Found out that wasn't true. Remember when the sponsor of the bill told us that we would hear from the whistleblower during impeachment? We'd actually have real process instead of having hearings and depositions in the basement, in the bunker of the Capitol. Remember when the sponsor told us this? That there was more than circumstantial evidence that President Trump colluded with Russia? That turned out to be false. Bob Mueller said it was false. Everyone knew it was false. In fact, it was such baloney, even the Washington Post has had to retract and change things from stories because they said, oh, yeah, there was a lot of false information in that dossier that they used to go spy on President Trump's campaign. And I think this is important to understand. The sponsor of this legislation wasn't just any member of Congress, Mr. Speaker. He wasn't just any chairman of a committee in Congress. He was the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, the committee that gets additional information from anyone else in the country making those claims that were not accurate. So maybe instead of having another bill that attacks President Trump because Democrats are afraid he's going to run and he's going to win in 2024, so they want to do everything they can to attack him, maybe instead of another bill attacking President Trump, we should actually focus on things that the American people care about. You know, you can attack President Trump all you want. I know one thing. A year ago, the border was secure. Sure was. A year ago, cities were safe. Safer than they are today. A year ago, we didn't have a 31-year high inflation. We actually had wages going up, real wages. A year ago, we didn't have a Department of Justice attacking moms and dads, putting a label, a designation, a threat tag on parents who simply go to school board meetings and speak out against a racist, hate America curriculum. No, we didn't have that a year ago. But you guys can keep attacking the president all you want, not addressing the issues that the American people care about. We're going to speak about the issues they care about. We're going to try to do everything we can to slow down your crazy agenda that is driving up the price of everything. We're going to speak out against and do everything we can to make sure the Department of Justice quits attacking parents. God bless the whistleblower who came forward and gave us the information, sent from the Counterterrorism Division of the FBI. We could be dealing with that issue today. We could be holding the Attorney General accountable, the Justice Department accountable for what they're doing. No. We're going to attack President Trump again. Democrats, that's the only thing they can do because they can't talk about anything else. Addressing the accountable to justice.
know.
To see right on the line, no, losing it on you, so last thing I need. If I'm honest, I'll just make you cry, and I don't wanna fight with you. I would rather lie to you. I promise now's not the right time. Yeah, I don't wanna fight with you. I would rather lie to you. I would rather lie. I would rather lie. I don't wanna fight. I would rather lie to you. If I'm honest, I'll just make you cry. Yeah, I don't wanna fight with you. I would rather lie to you. Call me all night long. Try to give you hints and a hard to see. Right on the line, no. Losing it on you, so last thing I If I'm honest, I'll just make you cry, and I don't wanna fight with you.
Palmyra. Sorry, did I say Petra? I meant Palmyra with more than a century. And so they were given these lands tax-free if they some sort of buffer state between the two major superpowers, which they did. But they expanded out, and their territory went all the way down through Haran, which is just below Edessa, all the way down to Petra. So I say Petra was a part of their principality. Because Petra suddenly grew from almost nothing to being one of the richest cities in the whole of the Roman Empire in the first century. And there's no good reason why that should have happened. I've just been reading the authoritative history of Palmyra. Sorry, did I say Petra? I meant Palmyra.
Oh.
Yeah, Palmyra, which is just to the east of Damascus. And yeah, in this this very, very thick book about the history of Palmyra, they don't know why it suddenly turned from being a very small oasis town into being one of the biggest cities in the Roman Empire in the first century. And I say it's because they were established by the Edessan monarchy, who were very rich, and they wanted to take over this region. And so they boosted Palmyra as being one of their big cities in their principality, gave it lots of money, and they wanted people to come in. And it's quite apparent that they had people come in from all over the local area to live in Palmyra.
Yeah.
Because there were jobs there, there was wages there, There was a good life to be had there. There was riches there, and it became a huge, great city to the east of Damascus. But they wanted to spread out a little bit further, so they had this narrow strip of land, went from Edessa all the way down to Palmyra. And in the AD 40s, come 50s, they wanted to take over Judea. And they did. And they did so by spreading money around again. It's always a good way of taking over a region. So the Queen of Edessa, who was called Queen Helena, went down to Judea in a time of famine and started spreading money around. And she bought grain from Egypt, and she bought figs from Cyprus, and she fed the people of Judea in their time of need. And I say this was in about AD 50. And she became the queen of Judea. She became the queen of the Jews because she was a Jew. She was a Nazarene Jew, the same sect as Jesus.
Fourth sect.
And yeah, because Jesus was a Nazarene, of course.
Yeah.
And so she became the queen of Judea, and she had the largest palace and the largest tomb in Jerusalem, which are both still there. In fact, they're still uncovering the palace just below the Temple Mount in Jerusalem now. So you can go and see it.
So the very important female matriarch.
Yeah.
Did they, as you mentioned Petra, let's just touch on that a minute, because if there was a connection to Petra, you can clear that up in a minute, but then there would have been the Nabatean connection, which connects us with the Herods again, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, I don't think I said Petra by mistake. I
Okay.
meant Palmyra. But there was a connection there because, of course, the Edessans were allied with King Aretas of Petra in that battle against Herod Antipas. So
I see.
they did have an alliance between each other. So between them, they covered the whole of the eastern board of the Roman Empire, all the way, down past Judea, down towards Petra. So,
and you've explored also a lot to do with Cleopatra. So let's take it from just where you left off. By the time they're taking over Judea, and probably even before that time, you're going to have these weddings, marriages, alliances. Like you said, some of them go wrong and armies are sent to, in chagrin, but a lot of them are going to work. Talk about when this Edessan group get in, what would be one or two of their great conquests in terms of a favorable marriage with somebody in the local region? You said they converted to Judaism, but maybe expand upon that with their alliances when they got there.
Yes, well, there is a tentative alliance with Egypt. One of the Ptolemy sons of Egypt is supposed to have married into this royal family. That's tentative because we don't have much information on it. Certainly they had marital links with the other kings of this region, because there were a few kings in the East which Rome were happy to use as client kings. So there was kings of Comane and Emesa. I must actually investigate the Emessan kings a little more, because they may be central to this, I don't know. But we have this place called Edessa, which is up in the north of Syria. But then it's sort of in the middle of Syria, we have this kingdom called Emesa.
When I found out about Topstep, it called my attention. It has changed totally my view.
Very similar name, different kingdom, and I don't know their relation to the Edessans, but they are obviously closely linked. They're around the Damascus and Homs region. And they, I think, are important because sons of that region became emperors in the 2nd, 3rd century. So when we come to Emperor Elagabalus, he was of the Emessan royal family. And I think there is a definite link there between Edessa and Emesa, which needs exploring a little bit more.
And King Jesus is where you go into, you hone in on that particular monarch, don't you?
That's really in my Jesus King of Edessa book.
Right.
So the King Jesus book, I'd never heard actually of Edessa at that time. So that was just the links from the Gospel story and the Talmud story about the Jewish revolt, and the links between the Jewish revolt and the biblical story, the Gospel story.
Of course, the Grail, the Grail stone at least would tie in here, because that monarch and the House of Emesa, there's a connection to that icon, isn't there?
Yes, the Grail stone is linked to both Edessa and Emesa. So this is why I think I must go into Emesa and look at it more deeply. For those who are not familiar with this, the Grail stone was known as the Omphalos, and it was originally in Greece. Well, originally it was in Egypt, but many, many centuries ago, it went from Egypt to Delphi in Greece. And it was the sacred stone of Greece. But then it sort of disappeared over to Parthia because it went with Alexander the Great. And it appears to have gone to Parthia because we have all of these coins from Parthia with the Omphalos stone actually on it.
Yeah, it's phallic, and isn't there a sort of a lattice, correct me if I'm wrong, around it?
Yes. We still don't know what this lattice is. In the Greek coinage, it's covered in netting.
Yeah.
And we don't know the significance of this netting, nor what it's made of. The copy of this stone, which is still at Delphi, seems to have shells. So the netting is made up of shells. And I couldn't see any reason for the shells being on it. So I wondered if these items were actually stars on it, something cosmic, instead of being shells. But anyway, you have this strange netting that covers it. And it's obviously separate to the stone, because on some of the coins, the netting spreads out on the floor below the stone. So,
almost like a checkered floor?
No, it's more like some sort of netting. Almost like a fisherman's net, but it's made of, it looks like it's made of shells or something.
Well, the net,
strange.
The net, it's very similar to things that turn up in stone in Newgrange on the solar stone there, the sunstone at the door, and on some of the other base stones, you get this sort of grid netting effect. The only connection I've made to it, we're having a guest on soon who is going to talk about it in maybe 2-3 weeks. The net was one of the symbols of the god Orpheus. He was the fisherman, and he was known in different cultures as Dis, D-I-S, the god of the underworld. But you never just have one appellation or one attribution to these gods because of the cultic nature, right? They're under different names in different places. And he was the great net caster. Hades is a version of Dis in the Fisherman of Souls. Orpheus, would throw the net out to net the souls. You get this motif with the Jesus figure as well as that kind of a savior of souls, and you get the fish. So the net, which you find on Masonic lodges, architecture, to me, that's the only strong connection that you could think of, is this god of the underworld, Pluto or whatever.
There is another connection, and actually I've not written about this, but there is another connection in that the pillars of Yakin and Boaz from the Temple of Solomon were surmounted by the sphere of the earth and the sphere of the cosmos. And both of them were covered in nets. And you can see that on some of the imagery. When you look at the imagery of the two pillars, Yakin and Boaz, you will see nets covering the sphere of the earth and covering the sphere of the cosmos.
Could be a Gnostic item then.
Yeah, well, I wonder exactly what that net is. Are they looking at this net as the latitudes and longitudes of the cosmos? So if you look at the sky and you actually draw it on a map, you will draw latitudes and longitudes, and it will form a net across the cosmos, because that's how you draw the cosmos. And I wonder if that's what they mean by netting, because this netting actually appears in the Old Testament. If you look at the description of Yakin and Boaz, it says that there are nettings that go across the two of them.
Is that right?
And that's why when you see images of these pillars, they're always covered in nets. And it's very, very similar to what the Greeks were portraying for the Omphalos stone.
Yeah.
And of course, the Omphalos stone was cosmic. It was supposed to be a meteorite. It was supposed to have been, as it were, a piece of the sun that broke off and fell to Earth, you know, this fiery lump of rock. So it was a part of the cosmos itself.
Yeah, there's certain, well, Net is an Egyptian goddess, although the vowels can alter, of course. There could be, but this thing is very phallic. So what's it doing? People think in terms of phallus has nothing then to do with the goddess tradition, but that's completely bogus, because merely looking at the Shiva cults and the Lingam cults of India completely shows you how much a role women do play in the whole anointing of the phallic and all of that. So women are very much involved in phallic cults in numerous ways.
The stone itself was androgynous, you might call it.
Yeah.
It was both phallic and it was an egg, because it's phallic because it's a conical piece of stone. But it's in a setting. And normally, if you bring it out of the setting, you see the bottom of it is curved, and therefore it's an egg.
Yeah.
So it's both phallus and egg. It's like the Indian lingams. If you see a lingam, it's a phallic stone. But if you take it out of its socket, it's actually an egg.
Yes, I've seen some of those. They're even like the Kaaba, you know, there's a certain shape of the opening, like you get. And one feminist writer in a book called Reign of the Phallus actually pointed out that the cervix, when you're not looking too closely, it can double up as a phallus. So there's a very, as you say, the androgynous hermaphroditic aspect. And I'm sure that this was big in the cults.
Oh, it was, yeah. The primeval Adam was supposed to be, well, he was supposed to be hermaphrodite, but I think androgynous as well. The primeval Adam was the primary demiurge, I suppose you would call him, of the Nazarene. So the Nazarene actually believed in the primeval Adam, which was an androgynous god. He was neither male nor female.
Well, I know that. Oh no, go ahead. Finish that.
Well, yeah, just as a thought on that, because we don't know who the primeval Adam was, but it's sort of linked into my previous books, where the original origins of this cult go back to Pharaoh Akhenaten. And of course, Akhenaten was always displayed as being androgynous. So he was neither male nor female. He had female aspects in his slight bust. White.
From heaven showed me how to live again. Now I'm falling and I can't see the ground. Can we stop this gravity? It keeps bringing me down. I can't breathe and I don't want to die. Can we stop this gravity? 'Cause I don't want to say goodbye. Gravity.
each other high, but we fall 1,000 times. But I'd never say goodbye or ever leave this stuff behind. When it's good, it's amazing. When it's bad, it's uneasy. I wouldn't have it another way. There's no other way. Yeah. When it hurts like this, ever like this, ever like, ever like this.
Wide hips, and he had no genitalia. So in some respects, he was the primeval Adam, as venerated by the Nazarene.
And
So
depicted like that.
Yeah, I do wonder if it goes back to him.
And remember, the ancient Egyptians did have a god called Atum, A-T-U-M.
Yes.
That could have been the basis of the atom. And then the net. C.S. Lewis always points out that the medieval worldview, and of course the medieval worldview was a very static worldview based on a lot of earlier cosmogonies, or whatever you want to call it. And there was the idea of the mundane and the supermundane, and the sort of a wall or a net or some kind of veil that stood between the sublunar and the lunar. Maybe, are you familiar with that?
No, not too much, no. I don't know if you can explain a bit more.
No, I can't remember. Yeah, except the fact that as a Christian thinker, he was always talking about this medieval worldview, and he knew all, in some of his great works, he always spoke about the dividing of the heavens into the lunar and the sublunar, and that the planet we're on, Earth, is called Thul Candra, the silent planet. So when you talk about those two pillars, which of course are definitely phallic, ithiphallic, from some other cultic phallic cult, but the fact that there's a net cast over them, that just made me think of that. So again, there's nothing to be certain about, just Lewis's remarks about that then this planet is different than the other ones in the solar system because it was called the silent planet, in which whatever we would call the Satan or the adversary basically owned this planet, and the others in this spiritual sense were not controlled. And so when you have those angel symbols of the seraphim and the cherubim, where they're on the wheels are often represent the planets, because a planet was never symbolized just by a planet, but it was its orbit, as a wheel. The orbit of a planet was to them a great wheel in the sky, in which the planet was just sort of the nub or the center or a jewel or some sort of thing. And so these seraphim and cherubim on the wheels were the ones who represented the 9 or 10 different planets, but the earth was dark. And it just made me feel that, maybe the net was the symbolism, that's a symbol that they used to say, these realms are cut off. The problem of good and evil is, and then think of the twin pillars being black and white, or there seems to be this dualism that we're captured in. But, this way my mind works, I don't want to get into all of that, but it's there. One has to be very, because even in your work, as you say, a thing that jumped out to me years ago when your first writings is about Pesher and about Gematria, and about that you might be meeting critics today who haven't quite got that, where that if you're reading the Talmud, if you're reading the Bible, my God, you just cannot take it literally, no matter what, of course they play with you. Sometimes it is bone literal, but as you said, Josephus is more of a mythmonger. He's under direction to not tell you as much as he wants to tell you. And this is the same with a lot of historians, even Herodotus. So talk a little bit maybe about that, of your history, your work, your sort of need or reliance on realizing that, keeping that always in your mind, that the Hebrew language, the Aramaic language, and then moving into the Greek and Roman, they're not telling you straight, are they? Maybe people haven't heard about Pesher. There's a certain code-breaking aspect to this, isn't there?
Very much so. They were wordsmiths, and they were very proud of their profession. And so they just loved having in-jokes. So everything was a play on words. Even within the biblical text, there's loads of plays on words, especially where there was something that was not entirely mentionable. So when Queen Makkah was worshipping or venerating an idol, in the Aramaic, I can't even pronounce it, but there's a play on words because it sounds like an erect penis. And of course, I didn't quite know what that meant, so I looked at it in the Latin Vulgate. And again, they just call it a priapus. So unless you know your Roman history, you wouldn't know what they're talking about. But again, a priapus is a phallus. And so they were always doing that to cover up what they were saying. And they were using Pesha, which is a way of prophecy. So you look at events in the past. So you trawl through the Old Testament and looking for similarities with current events. So you're looking for a similar character who has a similar life to someone in the present. So if you're looking for a Jesus character, you might look back into the Old Testament and you might find Balaam or Elijah. And okay, that's a sort of similar character. So now we can use that character to foretell the future, use it for prophecy. You know, what happened in the past might happen in the future. But I think more importantly than just prophecy, you can also use it to cover up who you're talking about. So that was important because, especially with the Talmud, they were writing this in the 1st century to the 4th century, and they either had the Romans looking over their shoulders or they had the Christians looking over their shoulders, and they didn't want to get into trouble with either of them because the Jesus character was taboo in Rome, and we can go through that, but very much he was taboo. And then the real historical Jesus character was taboo for the Catholic Church. You couldn't mention him and his real true life, but you could mention Balaam and you could mention Elijah. And so you could talk all day about these two characters and nobody would be any the wiser what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's a great way of covering things up within the Talmud. And unless you know who these characters are in the Talmud, it doesn't make a great deal of sense. So there's a great deal of that all the time. You're looking at wordplay, and some of it's just because, you know, they're being silly. That it's just humorous, you know, because they think it's funny.
Well, two things that jump to mind about that is the Jews have a long history as guests in other people's countries, like the Persians, the Assyrians, the Babylons, and even the Egyptians. So this may be, it's a very fertile route of discovery to say, where did they get that? Because then you're heading to Egypt, people who had a very highly sophisticated hieroglyphics, we would know them as, but had an incredible history of just this symbolic renditions, isn't it? It wasn't something probably the Jews just discovered on their own. This has a whole history that ties into astrotheology and many other cults going back to, I mean, who was it? J.R.S. Mead said that when you really read what's in Egypt, the priests are always telling you, we are but the later version of even greater elders. He's not the only one who quoted that. The thing is just unbelievable, isn't it, when you get back into the deep histories?
Yeah, and they didn't always know what they were talking about, and so yes, they would have illustrative ways of talking about it, like you were talking about the two great wheels, which is common in many cultures. The Greeks talk about the two great wheels of the cosmos, and even Arthurian legend has Arthur's cosmic cart with the two great wheels of the cart turning in the cosmos above. And of course, the two great wheels of the cosmos are the celestial wheel, or the celestial sphere, and the ecliptic. And if you look at the stars, the way they rotate around, yeah, you've got two big wheels in the heavens above, and they turn at different rates. Okay, you know, the celestial wheel goes round once a day, and then the ecliptic wheel goes round once every 26,000 years. But they both rotate in the heavens above. You've got these two giant wheels. So it's very descriptive, but unless you knew what they were talking about, you could be very confused.
Yeah. Yeah, and isn't it on those Masonic pillars? One is the celestial sphere, just as you're saying?
Yeah, one is celestial and one is the earth. So in a way, that's, yes, in a way, that's the same, isn't it?
Yeah. And remember, if people find it difficult to understand this aspect of the coding, think of a later artist like William Blake, who was able to understand the Pesher. So then he reprises Jesus yet again, and Elijah and Job. He's doing exactly the same thing in a much more modern era, although to us it looks like 200 years ago.
And if you look at the stars, the way the Greeks talk about the two great wheels of the cosmos, and even Arthurian legend has Arthur's cosmic cart with the two great wheels of the cart turning in the cosmos above. And of course, the two great wheels of the cosmos are the celestial wheel, or the celestial sphere, and the ecliptic. And if you look at the stars, the way they rotate around, yeah, you've got two big wheels in the heavens above, and they turn at different rates. Okay, you know, the celestial wheel goes round once a day, and then the ecliptic wheel goes round once every 26,000 years. But they both rotate in the heavens above. You've got these two giant wheels. So it's very descriptive, but unless you knew what they were talking about, you could be very confused.
Yeah. Yeah, and isn't it on those Masonic pillars? One is the celestial sphere, just as you're saying?
Yeah, one is celestial and one is the earth. So in a way, that's, yes, in a way, that's
Version of even greater elder history that ties into astro history, that ties in the two things.
Christians looking at us is in joke. So you look Christians looking over their shoulders, but you could mention Balaam and you could mention Elijah. And so you could talk all day about these two characters and nobody would be any the wiser what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's a great way of covering things up within the Talmud. And unless you know who these characters are in the Talmud, it doesn't make a great deal of sense. So there's a great deal of that all the time. You're looking at wordplay, and some of it's just because, you know, they're being silly. That it's just humorous, you know, because they think it's funny.
Well, two things that jump to mind about that is the Jews have a long history as guests in other people's countries, like the Persians, the Assyrians, the Babylons, and even the Egyptians. So this may be, it's a very fertile route of discovery to say, where did they get that? Because then you're heading to Egypt, people who had a very highly sophisticated hieroglyphics, we would know them as, but had an incredible history of just this symbolic renditions, isn't it? It wasn't something probably the Jews just discovered on their own. This has a whole history that ties into astrotheology and many other cults going back to, I mean, who was it? J.R.S. Mead said that when you really read what's in Egypt, the priests are always telling you, we are but the later version of even greater elders. He's not the only one who quoted that. The thing is just unbelievable, isn't it, when you get back into the deep histories?
Yeah, and they didn't always know what they were talking about. And so, yes, they would have illustrative ways of talking about it, like you were talking about the two great wheels, which is common in many cultures. The Greeks talk about the two great wheels of the cosmos. And even Arthurian legend has Arthur's cosmic cart with the two great wheels.
Act now to get Xfinity Internet for a great low price. Or visit Xfinity.com/free to see if you qualify.
So the Pizza Hut
wheels of the cart turning in the cosmos above. And of course, the two great wheels of the cosmos are the celestial wheel, or the celestial sphere, and the ecliptic. And if you look at the stars, the way they rotate around, yeah, you've got two big wheels in the heavens above, and they turn at different rates. Okay, you know, the celestial wheel goes round once a day, and then the ecliptic wheel goes round once every 26,000 years. But they both rotate in the heavens above. You've got these two giant wheels. So it's very descriptive, but unless you knew what they were talking about, you could be very confused.
Yeah. Yeah, and isn't it on those Masonic pillars? One is the celestial sphere, just as you're saying?
Yeah, one is celestial and one is the earth. So in a way, that's yes, in a way that's the same, isn't it?
Yeah. And remember, if people find it difficult to understand this aspect of the coding, think of a later artist like William Blake, who was able to understand the Pesher. So then he reprises Jesus yet again, and Elijah and Job. He's doing exactly the same thing in a much more modern era, although to us it looks like 200 years ago. No, in biblical terms, this is a man who, understanding this Pesher, not only uses it, but then even adapts it yet again. So it's not just something old and dusty. It's part of a form of communication that's still very much alive. And you can recast and rescript Mary, or, and I was think of him as doing that in this incredible coding and decoding and this allusions to figures that have an enormous symbolism. The lion, for instance,
Yeah, Blake does that, especially with his very famous image of the two naked characters, one of whom is called Loz. And between them is Stonehenge and whatever, and he's carrying the hammer and whatever. If you look at that, on the surface, it doesn't make much sense, but it's actually a first-degree Masonic tracing board. And the two characters are replacing the two pillars of Yakin and Boaz. So instead of having two pillars, he has two characters, and one is Los. And of course, if you turn that around, you get Sol. So one is the sun, the other is the moon. It's a first-degree tracing board from standard Masonic logic.
Extraordinary.
But he's presented it in such a strange fashion that you would never really know about it until you actually see one.
That's right, and he made Jerusalem. Did these feet in ancient times walk on England's pastures green? Jerusalem is actually a woman. Try that for size, an iconographic alteration, and yet still consistent on the esoteric level. But if you don't possess the esoteric key, well, it's exoteric, and that's the end of that. It's just a nice story. You might as well just tell kids at bedtime or something, and whole nations just think he was. We imagine that these kinds of people worked on this very literalistic level. Then when you go to the Bible, you find that you have to concede. And I think a lot of the blockheads, even if they have very, very high degrees, this is a restricted aspect. They're going to fight it, or they're going to say, no, there is such a coding, but my interpretation of the coding is better than everybody else. So, they might try to own it or copyright it. But think of even remember your Cleopatra allusions, that the Seb and the number 7 and the star. So these are atomistic symbols, they're astrological symbols, and sometimes they were held very dearly, weren't they, in the sense of the star, this word that turns up in the Essenes to represent a master. It turns up in the Gnostics, and it turns up in these other cults as well, and the number 7, right? These are all decodable.
Yeah, and just quickly before I go on to that, going back to Blake again with his And Did Those Feet. Of course, it's just a nice song. Well, in England, it's more than a nice song. It's the national anthem. And so the national anthem of England says that Jesus was in England. And again, he's harking back to a very, very old tradition that Jesus actually came to Britain, to England as it sort of was in Roman times. Yes, and did those feet in ancient times walk upon England's mountains green? It's the tradition that Jesus was exiled to what was then Britain in AD 70. There's an old tradition that goes back through Masonic, because Blake was a Mason, of course, he understood these things.
That's right.
And so he picked up on this old tradition that not just Joseph of Arimathea was exiled to Britain, but so too was Jesus in ancient times. In
his company, the British Israelites have accepted that and studied that. Even in terms of physical buildings, as you have done, your work goes far deeper than theirs actually, but even before you existed, there was this, as you know, the group that absolutely took those things literally, went to Tintagel and tried to go to Glastonbury and put the pieces together. I don't think they ever achieved it. I think your work is distinctive like that. You have several books on that, which is, because I was interested in that. The two things that really got me into your work was that, the British Israelite complication of did Jesus come or not, and in what form and in what way, trying to put that together. And then this one about, we nearly touched on it, with the Herods actually had land in France. And therefore, when we talked about the conquest of Judea and Edessa, possibly Emesa. But wait a minute, what's happening out here where these families, Mary ends up in Europe, for goodness sake. One is that Jesus is arrested and deported there, but there's also this movement to France, which changed not only French history, but Dutch history to English history. We'd need hours to go into it. But there is this incredible connection because the Herods owned the land in France. This is not just one little Middle Eastern family. These are tremendous power brokers in the world that Mary went to, isn't it?
Yeah, Herod Archelaus was actually exiled to France, and he lived in the south of France. And then, of course, we have the tradition that Mary got sent there as well. So this would have been after the Jewish revolt. This would have been sort of AD 71, something of that nature. And if I'm correct, and she was Mary Bothus, which not just myself, but Professor Robert Eisenman has said that Mary Magdalene was Mary Bothus. She was the richest woman in Judea in the AD 650s and 60s. But we have this rather tragic tale from Yohanan ben Zakkai, who was the rabbi who controlled Judaism after the Jewish revolt. So he obviously was a very pro-Roman. He had to be pro-Roman because he was working for the Romans. He was the guy who invented what we know today as rabbinic Judaism, who ended, the roast sacrifice and all of that business. And a lot of what's in the Talmud is actually written by this guy, Yohanan ben Zakkai. And he has this story about after the Jewish revolt, meeting Mary Bothus Magdalene, who had been the richest woman in Judea. And he's saying, because she's out on the streets picking barley corns from the ground. And he says, Mary, what's happened to your great wealth of your family? And they have this little discussion between each other. But it's apparent that now she is destitute. She's lost all her money. And yeah, the mythology picks up on her being then exiled to France. And it's quite a strong mythology. I mean, there's not a great deal of information to back it up. But when you go down into the south of France, you see an awful lot of this mythology has sort of rubbed itself off on the region.
That's
and
right.
You see traces of this mythology in all of the towns you go to. And I sort of traced it to a slightly different position. So a lot of people take her down towards Aix, which is one of the big towns in the south there in Provence. We have all of these stories about from the Sonia Society and all of this sort of business talking about those two famous towns in the south of France. But I took it up to Orange and thought she might have gone to Orange because Martha is said to have gone to Tarascon, which is the next town further up, further north. And where Martha, this is Martha of Bethany from the Bethany sisters, is supposed to have gone to Tarascon, where she tamed the Tarasque, which is this fearsome monster in Tarasque. But if you look at it, it's just a huge armadillo. They had these enormous great armadillos back in, actually, I don't know when they existed. Up to a few million years ago anyway, they had these enormous armadillos, which were about 2 or 3 meters long. And you can still find them occasionally, people poking around in boglands quite often find the remains of these enormous great animals. But anyway, the Tarasque is one of these huge great animals. It's a big armadillo.
Yeah.
And well, I think Mary went to Orange. Possibly.
Yeah. Oh yeah, your book, Mary Magdalene, is my favorite. Everybody should read it. I want to get to the star on her flag in a minute to take it in the direction of astrotheology again, but just a point that people may not understand, and that is her presence down there, or any of that group. This is not just important in terms of biblical history and the movements of the real Jesus, but it also turns up in romances. Because you've worked in the Grail cipher, the connection there would be the troubadour. This is, as I said, got me interested in it because I was looking for what that's all about, through other writers' years in the 80s and all, couldn't make sense of it. What is this chivalric troubadour, courtly love? I'm reading your work and I'm going, Oh my God, there it is. After how many years, right? So you can imagine after 25, maybe longer years of being into that tradition, and then there's a tie into the Arthurian legends, because you don't get a chivalric tradition or a troubadour tradition without the great Grail writers like Wolfram von Eisenbach and the whole rest of them, Christian de Troyes. So the tie-in here is also, and we'd only have the time to talk about it incidentally, but this merry cult, so to speak, gives rise to a lot more of French mythology, French history, French culture than people would even imagine. You've brought so much to bear on that as well. But let's go into this idea of her tutelary symbols on the French diadems. As you say, when you go to these places, you find the star. Now, the word Sheba or Seba means 7, doesn't it? And related to a star. So here is so astrotheological symbols. We don't even need to talk about the sun. I mean, Akhenaten and the sun, they're almost synonymous. But there's this other stellar sidereal component, and it comes out again in France with the use of the star that was picked up by the Masons. They all have it on their flags. The Orange Lodge in Ireland does. The Black Preceptory, they all use this either purple star, or the William de Gellone, right, was I think the first to use it in terms of France. And there's the Jewish connection.
Throughout all of this history in a way, because I mean, we have the Queen of Sheba, and of course Sheba in Egyptian means the star. And then when we go through into Aramaic, it has similar connotations. So in Aramaic, it means number 7. And it also means the Sabbath. And of course, the Sabbath is the 7th day. And I had this argument with a rabbi who said Sabbath has nothing to do with the number 7, but it's a Sabbath, and Sheba or Saba means the number 7. It's the 7th day, but somehow that's not connected to the Sabbath. Anyway, and it's the day of the star, whereas we say it's the day of the sun, Sunday. But theirs, it's the day of the star. The star is central to this, and it's normally, I think actually it's not a star. I think normally it's Venus, it's Aphrodite, because Isis was the star.
Yeah.
She is linked to the moon, of course. She is the female deity as opposed to the sun. So we have the sun and the moon, but she was also linked strongly to Venus. And of course, in Egyptian, her name was Ast rather than Isis. So she was called Ast. And from Ast, we get Astarte, Ashtoreth. And then her name changes in
We have never been accused of our thing. Helping you book that perfect stay. Booking.com. Booking.yeah.
Forget what you knew. Welcome to the motherfucking battlefield. I two-step with Lucifer, and ever since I started dancing, I walked the fine line between Einstein and Charles Manson. Starved this famine with my stomach growling, like someone shouting 100,000 times louder than thunder pounding. Fuck around and I'll punch your mouth in. I'm king of the mountain with my life in this project like it's public housing. Counting on the fact I firebomb entire songs and won't stop till the world's inside my palm like Viacom. Diabolic, I'll supply the higher wattage via fiber optic wire till you acquire some kind of knowledge. Cause life made me grow wiser than old timers, hot-headed like the Ghost Rider behind a slow driver. Soul survivor, flowing live is second nature, so don't test. It's best to save your breath like respirators. I throw a punch at your ribs that gives your lungs asthma and has you pouring out your guts faster than Dutch masters. Drunk bastard, past the point of no return like Denzel, tricking Ethan Hawke into smoking Sherm. Judgment overturned, holding court like Mordecai. Immortalized when I make statues bleed and portraits cry. I'll go to war for mine, rebel army, guard the border. I'm in the trenches barking orders like I'm Sergeant Slaughter. Pray to Jesus H for mercy and plead your case, cause on the front lines you're dead the second that you see my face.
This is the front line, this is the dead zone. Barely alive or in a box, is how you head home. This is the front line, this is the life that I chose. I thought I told you motherfuckers to lock and load.
This is the front line, this is the dead zone. Barely alive or in a box is how you head home. This is the front line, this is the life that I chose. I thought I told you motherfuckers to lock and load.
They said that the success of my music was theoretic, but my revenge is sweet enough to murder diabetics. Eugenics, Procter & Gamble, credit racial science. Couldn't produce a more aggressive intellectual giant. Nephilim, bury him with the bullets left in him. My heart is blacker than the children of Thomas Jefferson, blacker than back in the days of the tar and feathering. The cancerous endocrine, the eagle-ass American, the hatchet and the sticks, the fascist emblem. You could call it conspiracy theory, I don't give a motherfuck. You could get your motherfucked. National security's a code word for cover up. Hold that down, I look at character, never let the color get to you. I got white revolutionaries like Muslims in Chechnya, percussion dumping like the Russian mafia over you. But even they know what it's like when you fighting for svoboda. So whether Slavic or Islamic, vodka, gin tonic, drunken fantasies are cool, son, but here's the grim logic. You niggas wanna play industry and start to be rich until they fuck you for millions. Like Paul McCartney's bitch, my lions live inside a box like Jumanji. Sick niggas that'll stab you up like Indira Gandhi. So never desecrate the space on which I meditate. My thoughts rip through tank armored metal plates and start to resonate to the spot where Moses caused the sea to separate. The place that the prophet Muhammad started to levitate. The exact moment that Jesus rose set awake and Sid Harder became the Buddha that regenerates. Half a bar over, but I bring it home colder than dead soldiers. So controller, holder of knowledge, so fuck Dianetics. I'm like the whole librarian Kemet with Anunnaki genetics.
This is the front line, this is the dead zone. Barely alive or in a box is how you head home. This is the front line, this is the life that I chose. I thought I told you motherfuckers to lock and load.
This is the front line, this is the dead zone. Barely alive or in a box is how you head home. This is the front line, this is the life that I chose. I thought I told you motherfuckers to lock and load. Yeah, motherfucker. Immortal technique, diabolic. This is the front line. The people first one time. 32. And a little something. 33 degrees, motherfucker. Go home and figure it out.
Hey, buddy. I'm just gonna let him sit there. Yo, shout out to Hero Wars for sponsoring this video. This is awesome for me because I've been playing Hero Wars for probably a year or so before they even contacted me about a sponsorship, so it's completely genuine. There is a plethora of things that you guys can do in this game. You will never get bored with it, from arenas where you can fight people from across the world, the airship where you can go up to expeditions and find artifacts to upgrade your heroes, the outland mode where you can fight some really tough bosses like this freaking Kraken, and so many more things that I could spend 10 minutes talking about. So join the game now and you will get a super chest with a secret hero, as well as 600 emeralds and 30,000 gold. You can scan the QR code on the screen or download the game from the link in the description below. So do that, and I will see you guys in the game.
Did you know there's a 15-minute strategy helping traders like you generate up to 50
and the forefathers. Thank you. Chant from one of the four founders of the group Foreplay, Mr. Bob James.
And the forefathers.
Have you noticed what's going on?
The Eric Crown Crypto Channel wishing you a happy and healthy start to this nice, gloomy, actually, Thursday morning over here from Helsinki, Finland. Many things to be speaking about today. I want to follow up on yesterday's short-term time frame analysis. We got that violent price action with a wick up to $40,000 and what that sort of looks like for the next few days to come as we put the next macro event in sights, which of course is the CPI print on, I believe, the 11th, so next week of this month. Anyways, with that in mind, plenty to talk about today, so I will waste no more time. I do want to let you know that the trading journal features have been enhanced on the Crown Trade application. All you need to do is check it out in the link in the description below. It is also free, and you can actually sort all of your journals around now too, and compare your different strategies amongst each other, which is essentially what I'm doing. And we've also added more functionality on the panes over here, giving you more insight into how your strategies are working. There's going to be a lot more coming in the not so distant future, which I'm very, 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 very happy about. But until then, let's just dive in to perhaps I kind of want to start this off in a bit of a different way, because I feel like everyone's super bullish right now, and yes, I do think that there is good reason to believe that Bitcoin might even test that $41,500 region that we spoke about yesterday. However, there is a potential trap situation going on right here. It is unconfirmed. It is just a potential, but I want to go over the major confirming factor for this being a trap, and if it does happen, I would be looking at targets back down around essentially our lows of the week. Probably continuation from there as well. And it is quite simply this. Yesterday's breakout region right here at 39,150. As long as Bitcoin is above there, I do look at this again as more likely to float up and to the right. But below there, I would confirm, well, a trap in this case, the good old trap, right? Why is that? We have several things that do give it a potential. One of them being the potential hidden bearish divergence that Bitcoin will have going back to the highs that we saw from the 28th and even the 26th of April. So that was when Bitcoin was trading, a good $1,000 higher than what we're currently at right now. And then on top of that, we would see if Bitcoin were to close below that 39,150-ish region, even on a 4-hour time frame, we would see daily, very likely, assuming the daily follows through with it as well, daily stochastic momentum would turn back onto the downside with any sort of a closure today below 39,150. To top that off, we do also notice over here on the app that, yes, the funding rates are nice and positive right now on both the daily and the hourly. Of course, that doesn't just blindly mean that things are going to come down here. Obviously, generally speaking, it's generally going to be positive. But within the context of that current setup, if Bitcoin were to come down and close specifically below 39,150, then yes, this would be a concerning factor, as well as, likely there's going to be a lot of longs that are either forced out of their positions or going to or are going to take it, or just going to take it off, I'd imagine, as that is going to be dead money right there. Anyways, until then, I do want to once again reiterate my stance that, based off of yesterday's analysis, I think that Bitcoin could very easily trade up and to the right from here after a bit of a sideways consolidation. The target or the area of interest upside would still be kind of about the same thing as yesterday, that 382 Fibonacci retracement at about 41,500. That also has several confluences with a few other things, and I want to be also very, 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 very deliberately clear here that that this has not really changed anything on the higher term timeframes. In fact, that would be directly in line with the white 20 simple on the monthly, of which this is one of the charts that still makes me very much lean towards the downside long term. Now, long term obviously means long term, over the next few months, not today, not tomorrow, although, coming back down below 39 especially would be rather concerning and very likely does imply moves back down to the mid to low 30,000s. Anyways, in this case right here, I don't think I need to go fully over this chart yet again, but I'll just point out monthly MACD crossing the downside, represented by these green vertical bars right here, plus losing the PMAR, but we don't need to necessarily focus on that right now. Plus, most importantly, or the last thing that is that is necessary to make this setup viable, historically speaking, is closing below that white 20 symbol, which we've seen 1, 2, 3 times in Bitcoin's history. We're seeing the 4th time right here, obviously. And each and every time that we have seen it in the past, over the next 4 to 6 months, let's say, Bitcoin has come down to that green moving average, a 55 exponential, and found its lows. So that's the, the icing on the cake. Doesn't mean it's always going to work like that, but we do have some pretty good historical results of this. And for right now, that is basically about $25,000. So I still think that is relevant, especially as long as Bitcoin is below that white 20 symbol, as you see right here. That is when price action really started to accelerate to the downside, like you see right here, in 2020. It did kind of happen all in the same drive, to be fair. But in this case, guess where the 20 symbol is? 41,500. So that would be a great sort of rally up to, if Bitcoin were to continue, to get everyone on the wrong side and then slim it back down the other way, of course. I remain with my overall position that Bitcoin has more downside risk, or statistically speaking, has more downside risk, specifically as long as Bitcoin is below about $44,000. Why is that? That is due to the 5-day chart over here, of which we got another 5-day closure for CME, not for spot price action. That's actually going to be tonight, but there is something a little bit concerning about the way that CME did close here. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit too much. So let's talk about upside continuation first, actually. Sorry. Apologies on that. First and foremost, we also do see daily has confirmed many drives of bullish divergence coming in over here. Again, it will have a chance to create hidden bearish divergence if we do come back down and confirm a local high. That would be, especially with a daily closure below 39,100, but even with a full hour, probably front runnable. Until then, divergence target for the first one has already been hit. The second one would be between about 41 and 41,500 or so. On top of that, if we go over here and reference stochastic momentum, you will notice on the daily and other medium to higher term timeframes, we are pointed up. The daily is going to be pivoted up as long as Bitcoin is above 37,600. The 2-day is freshly crossing up above 37,750. And the 12-hour is also going to be nice and vertical here above about 38,300. So again, I do lean towards likely another try to the upside. The question is, where did the next lower high kind of come in as far as I'm concerned? And again, I'd be very happy to see Bitcoin do the old flipperoonie and end up being bullish. But my criteria for that is $44,000. So I suppose now would be a good time to get into why I'm looking at that region. Oh, by the way, the daily jewel actually did get that low. Yeah. Very interesting right there. Actually, pretty damn good signal, if I do say so, especially if the DMI flips around to support. Anyways, the reason why I do believe that there's still massive risk to the downside, not just because of the secondary chart right here, but specifically for that $44,000 or so region, is this chart right here. Let me just go back on over this. I've gone over this a million goddamn times, but the 5-day volatility versus momentum chart, anytime that we have seen volatility on the 5-day represented by BBWP get into the not single digits, but like teens or lower digit percentiles, the expansion phase from those extreme lows has led to about a 45% move over the course of the next a little bit over 40 days on average. Of course, this comes both to the upside and the downside as volatility is direction neutral, but the 5 days stochastic momentum has been incredibly accurate in getting the overall direction for this, even if we just backtest for the past couple of years. So it's actually been 100% perfect, to be fair. In this case, for right now, it should be known that that 5 days stochastic momentum is still downside angled. For spot price action, that will actually flip back up above 44,250, and for CME, which just closed last night. So this is a brand new tick right here. It is actually getting its first major drive down actually from basically November, which is kind of concerning. And more importantly, and also why I do really entertain the likelihood, or the potential, I should say, of a trap setup here, is that the number to cross it back onto the upside has moved up from that closure to today, the new open, from about 44,000 to now 46,000. So whenever you see that, when momentum is needed, or a higher close is needed, close over close, typically that implies that there is heavy downside pressure, and in this case would be heavy downside pressure. The one sort of I guess consolation prize would be this, in the sense that because of the way that Bitcoin is right now, we haven't necessarily seen volatility expansion just yet, right? All right, let me just go to this chart. There we go. We haven't seen it just yet. I think that it's going to be possible again today, but again, I want to see both a positive slope on the BBWP and the moving average. For right now, obviously we don't have it on the BBWP, and the moving average is, for all intents and purposes, flat. So I do think it's obviously coming. It's required a metric shit ton of patience, but the longer that Bitcoin essentially kind of goes sideways within this region, the more and more that this will naturally reset. It's probably going to take like, a month if it's going to happen at all. And if that were to happen, then, over some period of time, that's going to naturally flip back up. And if the volatility is still, relatively low like this, that's going to be my long-term bullish signal for targets up, technically speaking, to like, historically speaking, probably around $60,000 to the downside. If we do kind of measure it from here, probably looking at $24,000 to $25,000, which is again directly in line with this target over here. So I do expect that we're going to see a bit of fuckery in between here, but for the short term, I do think that hopium is relevant to have for upside continuation. Essentially, it's more likely as long as Bitcoin's above 39,150. Below there, I do confirm, a pretty nasty trap. There's going to be bounces along the way, obviously, but I'd be looking for, moves back down to the bottom end of this blue box, which is 37 to low, 37.5 to low 37. Probably another short-term bounce there, and then if it fails, I would be looking for the next major markdown between about 33 to 34.5. So yeah, I think that's going to do it for today's video. Nice and simple. Did I mention the funny rates? Yeah, I believe I did mention the funny rates, so good on that. Also forgot to shill the old Instagram. Yep, Instagram. Please be aware that if you're communicating with any Instagram account that is not the ones in the link in the description below, it is not me. I don't have any secret trade fund where I trade people's money. You are talking with a scammer, and it's probably not going to end up too well. Also, speaking about ending up not too well, Bybit, if you want to get wrecked leverage trading, I do have a link, an affiliate link, of course, for full disclosure in the description below. They give you like $3,000 or $4,000 deposit bonus, but understand, unless you already have a working strategy, which by the way you can test out for free on anything, a paper account for fuck's sake, but even on the trade journal feature for the Crown Chain application. If you haven't already tested that out and you don't have good statistics that do support your thesis as far as trading goes, probably not going to end too well, and I cannot in good faith promote that. But if you already have that done, then well, that is something to perhaps consider as well. Anyways, forgot to also request a like and dirt, but man, don't even bother liking the video today. Anyways, I'll be signing off with that. I want to wish you well, take care, and until next time.
Can artificial intelligence make you
becomes Aphrodite? And that confused me for a while because it didn't seem very cosmic, because all of these characters and names are all cosmic. It's all to do with astrotheology, as you know, one of your favorite subjects. And yet Aphrodite didn't seem to be very astronomical to me. It means the foam of the sea. But then I started thinking about this in terms of the cosmos. What is the foam of the sea in the cosmos? It's the Milky Way. And so what they're saying is Venus was born in the Milky Way. And there's only a few times of the year when Venus is actually superimposed upon the Milky Way. And so effectively you've got some sort of dating method. I didn't finally work out exactly what that dating method was supposed to give us, but it gives us a couple of months in the year when Venus runs through the Milky Way. So yeah, that's running through into the south of France. Yeah, they have this star symbolism again. The lone star was the symbol of Guillaume de Gaulogne, as he was known, William of Gaulogne, who was William of Orange. He was William of Orange. This is a very early William of Orange. Even the Dutch, because I lived in Holland for quite some time, and the Dutch didn't know this history either, which I found very strange. It wasn't taught in their schools, that the Dutch were not Dutch. They came from France. They came from Orange in France. And that's why the Princes of Orange in Holland are called the Princes of Orange.
Yeah.
They're named after the town in the south of France called Orange. And yeah, the guy who set up that principality, because it was entirely separate from the rest of France, was Guillaume de Gaulogne.
The hook
and
nose.
we have this great long, as you were saying, the troubadours of France. We have this great long story, the story of William Guillaume de Cologne, and it tells this whole story about this family who set up this principality. And in my estimation of it, it's links with Mary Magdalene.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing after I'd read all of this and written about this is I found out that this book, this Troubadour's Song, was written by Wolfram von Eschenbach. So the very same guy who wrote about Arthurian legend was also writing about these people down in the south of France.
Yeah, amazing.
Part of the same story, almost. Part of the same story.
In which the Holy Grail also turns up. The whole cast of characters is back. Again, different wine, same wine in different bottles.
Yes.
You know, there is a conversion later as they move to Holland. Of course, the famous one people would know is the one they transform from Catholics to Protestants. As far as that goes, we could have a whole argument about that. And then finally, the Dutch royal families with the more familiar William of Orange moving over to where? Britain, to depose the King James there and then set up what everybody knows as the British monarchy, which of course affects Irish history enormously there. And then, so
they're all ginger, of course.
Up even to this very day. And of course, it is at this point then, say somebody knew nothing about Masonry, at least this is conceded by Masons themselves and certainly on their iconography, that at this point, merely from a symbolic level, whether you like Masons or you don't, just they are preserving some of, if not all, then some of these motifs, the movement, the symbolism, the female, it's all there to be understood. All the different motifs that might have spanned centuries, going even back to Egypt, like the blazing star. You can see it on the outside of Masonic lodges. You don't even go inside. Or the great geometry, as you said, the two pillars, the blazing star, the symbol of the G, and then the diadem of the compass and protractors, etc. So it's loaded with Templar symbolism, and this would then take somebody, as I did, as I tracked all of this, you know, to the Templar connection, because were they then, William de Cologne, did he have a Templar body that then became, you know, the famous Merovingians who became the bodyguard of Mary and her progeny and so on? So there's a tie-in to the famous Holy Blood motifs that you have explained, I think, far better than any of those writers. In fact, they sometimes careen off into areas that don't quite make a lot of sense. Your work holds together in a much more grounded historical and scientific way, actually. And it's certainly essential to anyone who wants to know more about that Mary bloodline story of Jesus and the French connection in the sense of René Le Chateau, that whole mystery. Your work does. Mary Magdalene would be the book there to start with. It's my favorite book of any of you. Well, I mean, that's a, you know, how do you say which one is favorite? But to me, it just, because it answered so much. But coming back to, if I was to recommend, and because we're running out of time as well, but I would recommend your latest book, Jesus of Edessa, to anyone who wanted to get the scope. And you can work back from that book, actually. You can start with the end book, you know, because I was thinking that I've read all your works, but I was always thinking about, hey, if I was to, which I do actually physically do recommend your works to people. And I was thinking, oh my God, shall they start with Jesus, you know, King Jesus or something earlier, or Skoda, the Queen of the Scots and all this. But I think actually Jesus of Edessa is the one I would recommend. I don't know if you agree. And then they can work their way back, but all the previous works will be relevant. They will not be like different in that sense to throw somebody. They will actually be very, very coherent by reading the last book first, so to speak. I don't know if you ever recommend that yourself.
I do, because it's the meat of the whole subject, and you know, that's the culmination of all of the rest of them. And very nicely, it does tie in with all of the other books, because of course I didn't know anything about Edessa when I was writing the other books. This all led up to the discovery of Edessa. Even the Edessa book wasn't called Edessa when I wrote it. It was called Queen Helena, because that's what the book was about.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until halfway through that book that I even discovered this town of Edessa. And that's one of the things I like about my research, is that it ties into the previous books that I've already written. And so it didn't change any of the story I had already written in the previous books, like King Jesus or Cleopatra to Christ. It actually confirmed what I'd written previously. Because in the even in the Cleopatra to Christ book, I have this monarchy being thrown out of Parthia and ending up somewhere in northern Syria on the eastern boards of Syria. But I didn't know where because I'd never found this town before. And it wasn't until 2 books later that I suddenly found out where they actually went to.
Yeah.
And they actually went to Edessa and set up this new principality in the eastern half of Syria. That would be Edessa and Palmyra, the great city in the desert.
Now,
So,
they've made very poor documentaries for 20, 30, 40 years on some of this material. And we've had those piecemeal. Your book there could make not only one documentary, but a series. So that's why also when I'm reading it, it's so visual. It's almost like a fictional story. It really is like a Cecil B. DeMille movie, like a Cleopatra in that sense, but you also know you're getting the truth, because remember, you also speak a great deal about the history of Armenia. So it's not limited to one little, which is what you get with other people's books. I've read them all, and it's fascinating, but it doesn't quite have the scope that last book, and then even King Jesus has, because you're moving from the West, from Britain, say take King Jesus, but even the last one. This is a sweeping story that goes from Parthia. I mean, you're even talking about the Atlas of Egypt. I do want to end this program on one anecdote about that. But then it moves through, as you say, from the Parthians. Who are they? Well, I don't even know where Parthia is. What's that? Are they Persians? So you're telling a story, and then you go down to the Jewish connection, which is, to me, absolutely monumental, because this family actually does then marry into Jewish traditions. And what's that? Because there's a big difference between upper elite aristocratic or merchant Jews who have an esoteric, Kabbalistic attitude towards life, very similar to Egypt. In fact, very similar if people have read your work. And then, as I say, it goes into explaining more of the familiar Greek and Roman, and then even in the British system. So this is a very comprehensive. No wonder you have critics. What the hell?
Yes.
Right?
It's very comprehensive. In a way, it's a history of the Roman Empire in the 1st century, because this was so intertwined with what Rome was doing. This is always the problem when you're reading the gospel story. They've trapped it in a little tiny location in the middle of, the Eastern Roman Empire, and it's all happening just around Jerusalem. Well, no, this was a much bigger story than just Judea. This was a big story of the whole of the Roman Empire, how the Roman Empire was governed, who was going to govern it. So the whole point of this story was the ambitions of a royal family. And that royal family turned out to be the Edessan royal family, but they came from Egypt, they went to Parthia, they were thrown out of Parthia, they ended up in Edessa. And initially I thought they were quite poor there because they'd been thrown out of the country, but it transpires that they came out of Parthia with half the Persian treasury. So they weren't short of, a few shekels. And using that money, they used it to gain influence in the whole of the east of the Roman Empire, to gain lands, to gain influence in the kingdom of Judea and the whole of Levant and most of Syria. And then the final culmination of this growth of this, the ambitions of this particular royal family, was the empty throne in Rome. So, Nero was dead in AD 68, the throne was empty, and it was empty for whoever could grab it. If you had a big enough army, if you had enough money, you could put your name out there and say, I'm going to take over Rome. And this was the year of 4 emperors. 4 emperors came and went and had a go at this and tried to become the next emperor. And they were all overthrown by the next one, and then overthrown by the next one. And then we ended up with this enormous great battle in Judea, which I say had nothing to do with Judea at all. This was the battle, the final battle for the throne of Rome. And whoever was going to win this battle was going to become the next emperor. And that battle was between Vespasian, who was just a commander at that time, an army commander, and the king of Edessa. And whoever was going to win that particular war was going to become the next emperor. So they were going for high stakes here. And of course they lost. And that's why they ended up getting evicted and exiled and everything else. But that's the reason why this, because I say that the kings of Edessa, of course, were linked to the biblical Jesus story and Jesus himself. And that's why this guy was actually crucified wearing a crown of thorns and a purple cloak, because the crown of thorns was the traditional crown of the Edessan monarchy, and the purple cloak was the symbol of the Emperor of Rome, because that's what they wanted to actually achieve. And so it was mockery, basically. It was mockery of a pretender to the throne of Rome who had failed, and now he was going to get crucified. And that's the biblical story. So it's a huge story that affects the whole of the Roman Empire. And that's why it was the Roman Empire that wrote this story. And they wrote it through the cooperation, I suppose you might call it, of Josephus Flavius, who was the poodle of Emperor Vespasian. He was his favorite pet Jew, and he wrote the whole history of this region. And so he was the guy who could craft this new story. And he was the guy who was effectively in charge of Judea. He was the de facto sort of king of Judea at that time, working for Vespasian.
And as you say, he created the simple Judaism. What a concoction that is. There's a couple of thousand years of interviews. He's literally St. Paul, isn't it? The author of the Acts.
Yeah, he is Saul himself. So Joseph is his Saul. I said this like 25 years ago or more. Some people are coming around to this idea. There's still a lot of opposition to it, but it does explain everything that happened in the gospel events. Not acceptable to fundamentalist Christians, because not because of what it does to Saul, but because nobody wants Josephus Flavius as being the author of their religion. And it also means that Jesus must have been alive in the AD 50s and 60s, which again is unacceptable to Orthodox Christianity. But apart from that, it explains everything that happened in the gospel events.
But is that where, in your personal career, the first blowback came? Or was it over another issue when it really first started in earnest, and you knew you had to, suit up to deal with these people? Was it over this Josephus thing or something else that they didn't like?
Yeah, that was one of the big things. The two or three big things that people don't like about this thesis is Saul being Josephus, merely because they say it's impossible, but it's not impossible. All you need to know is that Saul went on his first missionary tour of the Mediterranean aged 15. And of course, he was a man at that time because he had already been through his bar mitzvah. The second main thing that people don't like is that my Jesus character turns into a real king.
That's right.
Which they deny, which is very strange because, Jesus was born as a king, and he was only crucified because they say he claimed he was a king. And then they say, oh no, he wasn't a king. He was just a carpenter. But the Gospels say he was a king on 36 occasions. So why not, believe the Gospels? So there's a lot of opposition to that, even though the Gospels do say he was a king. They say, oh no, he was just a pretend king. He's not a real king. And they don't want him to be a king because now he becomes powerful. He's no longer a carpenter. So he's now no longer the downtrodden pauper, at the mercy of all these powerful people. And he's just a poor man, with a message. Suddenly he becomes a very powerful person with a message again. But he was a warrior king, so he was very powerful. He was involved in a war with the Romans. That's not the story they want to sell. That's not the story they've sold for the last 2,000 years. And so that brings a lot of opposition to it. They don't like that change in the story. What else don't they like? Well, yeah, they don't like him in being involved in a war. But that's strange, because if you read the Gospels, he was involved with the war. I mean, he was jailed alongside revolutionaries who had committed murder in the revolution. Okay, so what revolution was that? It was the Jewish revolt.
Yeah.
But they, you know, in the Christian world, they don't want to acknowledge that Jesus could ever have been a powerful king.
And they hinted at it by having at least one of his disciples be a Sicarii or a zealot. I don't remember which one.
Yeah, it was, Judas Iscariot was a Sicarii.
There you are.
And then, of course, one of his other disciples was a zealot, Simon Zelotes. The zealots were the initiators of the revolt. The Sicarii were the assassins that used to go around with a small knife and assassinate their opposition. They used to hide this knife under their cloaks, and then in the crowds, they used to kill one of their opposition people and melt into the crowds once more.
Yeah,
that was Judas Iscariot. Yeah, it's all to do with a revolt. It's all to do with a takeover of Jerusalem. But if you understand that and accept that, it had nothing to do with Jerusalem. And this is the second thing that they won't accept, that this had nothing to do with Judea. This was, Judea was just a stepping stone that they wanted to take over the Roman Empire. That was the goal. That's why he was crucified wearing a purple cloak, which was the symbol of the emperor. It really had nothing to do with Judea, except that to control the east of the empire was a very powerful position, because Syria at that time was perhaps the richest part of the Roman Empire. It's not today, because it's had 1,000 years of Islam, but in those days, the big temples of the Roman Empire were in Syria. You look at Baalbek, which was the biggest temple ever created in the Roman Empire. It's vast. It had pillars that were 2.4 meters across at the base. I mean, these are vast, vast pillars. If you look at Palmyra, it had the biggest temple arena in the whole of the Roman Empire. And okay, it wasn't as big as Baalbek, but the pillars were unfinished, and they were unfinished because the capitals were made of bronze. I mean, that was stupendously expensive to put bronze capitals on the top of these pillars. They've all gone now, of course, because they were all looted, but it must have been the most expensive temple in the whole of the Roman Empire. So we're not talking about a backwater, which we always think of this, that Jesus was born in some backwater of the Roman Empire. No, this was central to the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
It was the richest part of the empire, and it became so influential that 200 years later, 150 years later, in the early 3rd century, the emperors of Rome came from Syria. You look at the Severans, you look at Elagabalus, and we're going back to the Holy Grail stone as well. It was Elagabalus who took the Holy Grail stone from Syria. This is why I was saying that the Holy Grail was something to do with Edessa, because this sacred stone came back from Parthia and ended up in Edessa. And I think that's one of the reasons why Edessa became so important. They had managed to capture one of the central elements of Judaism. They had the Ark of the Covenant in the 1st century. And we have coins. We know this because there's an inscription in their burial site, but also they have coins. And the coins show the Ark of the Covenant in a temple. And it's known as a Bethel, which is the Omphalos stone, because it's a house of God, but it's only a small house of God. So it's the Ark of the Covenant was the box that contained the sacred stone. And the sacred stone was one of the stones of God, and therefore it was a house of God. It was a Bethel. It was a omphalos.
Because it was that shape. When you people see it every day on cathedral buildings, capitol buildings. In fact, they may have a Donatello like a dome, and then a little tiny little house at the top, little dome. People think, oh, what's that? Yeah. So you see it in these spires, you see it in the domes of the most famous buildings in the world. Little do they know that it's a magnification of this whole concept. See, the thing I like about your work is that we have a lot of stuff in the foreground that everybody from childhood knows about Jesus and the 12 disciples and the crucifixion. And not many people know the history of Judaism, which would then be the middle ground and the background. And then, or the background would really be Egypt, Atlantis, Egypt, the origins of monotheism, etc. And so the difficulties come because everyone is so focused either on the foreground, which is the general public, or some historian who's just got this whole background view about the Egypts and all that. What your work does is it brings the lot together in which we get a far more vivid picture. We have the background. I think you're one of the best writers ever. In fact, I know it because I've read everybody else. And as great as your Eisenmans are and your Barbara Thierings and whoever you might want to talk about, there's less cohesion in their work because they tunnel vision on a particular point and then have just complete cognitive breakdown if they have to move one step out from what their speciality is to think about it in terms of the greater world. And you don't seem to have any such rigidity there. That's why it flows. And so somebody who's coming in interested in Roman Empire, somebody who's coming in with history of the Jews, somebody who's coming in with Akhenaten and that. And by the way, just as many critics as you have, there are other writers that I recommend people go to, like Professor Feather, like the Copper Scroll, a great book. There's corroboration out there. Whether those writers are knowing your work or not is at this point not the point to make. But their works, if people spend the time to read them, my God, that man's work and many others is totally parallels what you're saying. And so I would imagine that a lot of your critics actually are not as widely read, perhaps, as they claim to be.
I think a lot of them are constrained by their own belief systems, whether they understand that or not.